Hi, I'm Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with my friend Pedram Amini, who is the CTO of InQuest. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you bet. I'm glad you're able to stop by. I'm looking forward to hearing about the company and about you. And I know it's very interesting technology, so I think people are going to enjoy it when you're hearing about InQuest. So.
Thanks, Ed.
Hey, tell me kind of how the company came about, and maybe a little bit about yourself, how you got into this line of business.
Sure. Actually, I started off not too far from here in New York. My initial hacking days were out of Stuyvesant High School, just a couple blocks from the World Trade Center.
Did you change all your grades when you were a kid? Or
no, I didn't change my grades, but I did make free phone calls. At the time, payphones were all the rage. It was the pre-cell phone era, and I had a little neat red box that I would carry around.
Did
that I
you
could,
really?
Yeah. So I could essentially virtually put quarters into the machine and make phone calls.
2600 frequency coming out?
That's the Captain Crunch whistle. This one was a different type of frequency that would fake the quarters being put into the machine.
Ripping off AT&T, right?
Yeah, well, past the statute of limitation now, so.
So that was your first sort of interest in cybersecurity?
Yeah, you know, it was, I'd go to Radio Shack, I'd read the 2600 magazine, you know, I'd fiddle around with phones. And then from there, I got into reverse engineering through a product called Soft Ice. You know, I just found it to be fascinating. I've always been one to enjoy puzzles, and this is the last puzzle I picked up. It's just ever changing in my hand, so I've never put it back down.
Yeah. So after Stuyvesant, tell us more about yourself.
Sure, I went to college in New Orleans at Tulane, studied computer science there, and you know, mostly didn't go to class and instead spent the time just playing around with the school networks, you know, figuring out how to get free laundry services or how to hack the ID card we had to fake myself as any other student on campus. And anytime I found something, I'd report it to the school, and so I kind of became known as, you know, the on-campus hacker.
I wonder if we should have checked you out before we let you in the studio.
Probably.
Here. I probably should have done that. Now, you eventually found your way to one of the very early IPS companies. You were there. How'd you get there, and what'd you learn?
Yeah, so you know, prior to joining Tipping Point, which was the world's first intrusion prevention system,
absolutely,
I was working for a company in DC called iDefense, and I was working on their vulnerability contributor program. It was the world's first public vuln buying program. And so when that company was acquired by VeriSign, Tipping Point reached out to me and said, hey, we'd love for you to reproduce that program here under our umbrella. And so I did. I moved down to Austin, Texas, and I created the Zero-Day Initiative.
Now, Tipping Point, I think of as being kind of a pioneer in network security and attack detection and mitigation. What'd you learn there? What were some of the learnings there?
You know, it was fascinating. Kicking off, it was a new market. IPS didn't exist.
It didn't.
It's funny to think about it now because in this day and age, everyone's looking for preventative medicine. You know, back then we had to essentially plow forward with the market. Nobody understood the technology, so we're really kind of first to market there, and it was a fascinating team. You know, a lot of those guys I still keep in touch with. They've gone off to do great things. Smart hardware guys, smart threat intel guys. Just overall a fascinating product.
Yeah, that idea of kind of shunning source IPs based on detected capability. It's a pretty good idea. It wasn't going to stop, nation-state hackers.
Yeah.
But I always thought that was a pretty clever idea, and I guess Tipping Point probably was one of the pioneers that came up with that.
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
Interesting. So take us from there. What'd you do after Tipping Point?
So post Tipping Point was acquired by HP at some point, and me not being one for wanting to work for massively large companies, I went off and I created a consumer product with a close friend of mine. It was called Jump Shot, and we were in essence a post-AV solution. We gave out these little cute USB sticks that had little characters on them, and it was designed as a consumer product, really with my father in mind. I figured if I could solve his malware problems automatically, then we had a product that was worth selling.
Your father had malware problems?
Constantly. I don't know how he manages to find these things, but he's patient zero in many regards.
Must be that bad broadband in Queens or something.
That's what it says, for sure.
Yeah. Now, so what brings us to InQuest? Tell us about the company and what you guys are about, what you guys are building, what the company believes in.
Sure. So, when I was at Tipping Point running the Zero-Day Initiative, we had a lot of interested DoD customers that were curious to learn more about the information that we're garnering through that program. And from our perspective, it was interesting for us to work closely with them because we figured if there's ever going to be overlap and discovery of zero-day being used to attack one of our customers, our DoD-based customers were probably going to be high up on the probability list there. So we had a lot of technical exchange meetings in an effort to arm them with the information that we had to help them up their defensive posture, and also for us to potentially discover exploitation of this zero-day in the wild.
Yeah, and those 0 days come from some pretty serious offensive capability. You're not talking about the minor leagues.
No,
right?
not at all. These are, to date, the Zero-Day Initiative, or the ZDI for short, is the #1 contributor of CVEs, #1 contributor of Microsoft vulnerabilities. We work with thousands of researchers worldwide. It's a fortunate path for me. I consider it an unfair advantage in being able to see the mindset of all these researchers globally and how they both found and exploited vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So how'd that find its way to what you're doing now?
So during that time is when I first met my business partner and original company founder and CEO, Mike Archimone. Yeah. He was running a SOC for a large-scale, multi-thousand user office space, and in the course of his tenure there, he got to vet pretty much every vendor under the sun. This is a unfair advantage on his end, where he had the opportunity, the manpower, and the time and budget to actually bring vendors in, really stand them up in this multi-gig environment, and run them through the ringer. Yeah. So it was in that process that him and his team identified a number of gaps. Once they had found best-of-breed solutions across the various vendor spectrum, there was still the need to deliver this secure pipe, and so they started building this homegrown tool to kind of fill in the gaps that were remaining from the public vendor pool, essentially.
So what were the gaps?
The biggest gap that we saw was when you're looking at from a network perspective, there's a lot of strong tech out there for finding a myriad of attacks that are going towards your servers, or things that are easy to see from an outside perspective. Anything that up to layer 7, if you look at the OSI model. But as attackers started getting more clever with bypassing security technology, they started encapsulating or enveloping their payloads, and it became very difficult from a network perspective to peer into these things. We like to use the Russian nesting doll, the Matryoshka doll, as an example. From a network perspective, you can see...
Those are those things where the little doll...
Yeah, exactly. It gets smaller.
Yeah,
correct.
Right.
So, from a network perspective, if you're looking at these, dolls in transit, to use that analogy, you can see the size, the shape, the color of the outer layer doll. Maybe you have the opportunity to open up and see the next layer doll inside. But if anything is enveloped more than a couple of dolls deep, you're not going to be able to inspect that content. And so this was a big gap that was essentially bypassing the entire, both commercially available and open source defensive stack that we had.
And what are you looking for? Are you looking for indicators of compromise?
We're mostly looking for, on the way in, we're looking for payloads that are targeting the end user. So it's no surprise today, but going back 10, 15 years, it was new at the time. The common way for attackers to gain their initial foothold is to target some end user, be it a desktop, a laptop. Then once they've gained access to that single node, pivoting out laterally from there. So it was those initial payloads, your Office documents, be it Adobe or Microsoft, your Java applets, your Flash, things like scripts and archives, PowerShell, these kinds of things.
Those kinds of things, when you do find that, you can be pretty certain that's malicious, right? That's not going to be accidental, or could it be?
They can be, especially in large enterprises. You're going to see some, for example, macros attached to spreadsheets.
Weirdly coded thing.
Yeah,
but maybe just as bad. Right?
They're trying to protect intellectual property, as an example. Their special formulas and their spreadsheets. But in general, what we're finding, we've done a good job of being able to disseminate the good from the bad.
Yeah. How's the product work? Is it an appliance that you drop into the network?
There's multiple deployment methods. Our flagship product is an appliance today. We can also install virtually or offer it as a service in the cloud. But sticking with the appliance model, we have, depending on your throughput, from 100 megabit to 20 gigabit in a single rack mount 1U. We offer a variety of collectors.
You put it at the choke point, at the edge of the perimeter, or for east-west, I find someplace in the network? Or
No,
where do you put them?
We're typically north-south. So we're looking at the perimeter, looking at ingress-egress traffic. So trying to find malicious logic coming in, trying to detect sensitive logic or sensitive data going out, or any kind of C2 beacons. So really, whatever we can do from the ingress-egress point, we do. You know, as a gap filler with that perspective, we'll find areas that are less researched by the entire other vendor space, and we'll focus our efforts there.
Most people watching would tend to think of the algorithms as living somewhere in that spectrum of low-end signatures through behavioral analytics and correlation up to and including machine learning and so on. Where do you guys live in that? Is any of those spots match up where you guys are algorithmically?
All of them.
I have a feeling it would be. Yeah.
So we're high throughput, but then what we capture, we expand with a proprietary stack that we call deep file inspection. So this is where most other network-based vendors kind of take it up to layer 7. That's where we pick up the baton and run further with it. So we're exposing data there. Then once we've exposed data, it's both a signature set that is based off of, we've got guys from Tipping Point, guys from the DoD, so seasoned signature developers that are bending regex in ways that make my head spin even today. And then there is heuristical machine learning aspects as well. So we focus on the full gamut. We say that we throw everything in the kitchen sink at the problem.
On the machine learning side, are you actually looking at some sampling data and learning and labeling and
Sure.
doing some training? How does that work? You take some malware examples.
The best way I can describe it is, we're trying to a large part, we're trying to automate what a SOC analyst does at scale. So regardless of how fast data and logic are going across the wire, we want to ensure human level scrutiny. And so if you've ever sat next to an analyst, there are some malware samples that you can just look at them and you know that they're malicious. That's what we're trying to capture from the machine learning aspect. Right? So there's the signature list portion and the signature portion that together augment to make a solid solution.
So if I have a security scheme in place already, and most people do have something, they would buy InQuest to kind of turbocharge the exploit detection. Is that a good way of thinking of it?
Yeah, sure. There's a number of different scenarios. In some cases, we can replace existing gear. They're replacing a data collection gear.
So if somebody has that, you guys can slide in. They don't have to spend extra money. They can actually replace something. That's
exactly.
Good.
Yeah. Another alternative is we just come in and we augment. So as an example, if you have a variety of sandbox or detonation products, many of these don't have the ability to automatically collect files, or if they do have a network component, they get overwhelmed fairly quickly. It's a very expensive process to sandbox a sample. So if you bring us in, we essentially turbocharge that component. We'll sit in front of it and we'll gather the data and we'll analyze it with our own onboard, relatively much higher speed analytics. And then for the samples that warrant it, we'll pass it off to the sandbox and allow it to do its thing and actually ingest that back in as well. Once again, going back to the automation of the SOC analyst.
You have your own console, or do you link in and provide an interface into an existing console? How would that work? How would I review what I'm seeing? In
the majority of environments that we're in, folks have SIMs, and so we connect to the SIM and we send all our alerts in that way. But we also do have a fully web-based console that is predominantly used more for the threat hunting and searching aspects of the product.
So you might do both. You might use your InQuest console for whatever and also drive the telemetry into Splunk or
That's correct.
Darkside. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, I'd say most of our customer base is, when they're working on a response, they'll pivot from the SIM back to the box. But when they're working on threat hunting, they pivot from our box out.
I see. That's interesting. What do you do when you hit encryption, when encrypted payloads? How far can you go with an encrypted payload?
So in the environment, most of the environments that we're in are fairly higher maturity, and they'll already have some solution for decrypting and mirroring the traffic. In other cases, we can tie into the corporate proxy. So where they have SSL termination there, and we'll hook into that proxy and gain visibility to all ingress, egress traffic that way. Alternatively, if none of those things are available, the way that we handle encryption is by analyzing the certificates themselves and the flow patterns. Things like session duration, byte counts, packet counts, who the SSL certificate is from. I love to give this example of the nation-state group, Turler group from Russia. They had a pretty interesting technique. What they had done was they had data exfiltration, and they chose a route on the internet where they knew it would go through a satellite communication link. That way they can just snatch the signal out of the sky and not have to worry about getting attributed with an actual endpoint that the data is going to. And so it's a very neat, from an attacker's perspective, anti-attribution technique, but in the end they reuse the same SSL certificate that they had in previous campaigns, and so we're able to fingerprint them that way.
Oh, well, yeah. Hey, what sectors have been excited about the product? Is there one or another that, you mentioned government, kind of military. I know that you guys have a background in that area. Has that been the most aggressive user of the platform to date?
It has been. We're launched in 2013 and have been spreading by word of mouth, primarily in the DoD and the IC space, pretty much since then.
Yeah.
It was about mid last year in 2018 that we felt we were ready to pivot this technology to the commercial sector. So today we're focusing on financial, casinos, healthcare, folks who are adamant about their security stack being on-premise and ensuring that their data isn't going out to any cloud provider. Or,
So a good way to think of it is you've developed the technology kind of with some guidance from government customers, and now taking it commercial. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
It's easier to do it that way than the reverse, right? That's a good way to do it.
Yeah, we tell everyone we've launched this company backwards. Generally, you get funding, you go commercial, and then you fight your way into the government. We started off on the other end of the spectrum and are coming out.
Hey, if you can survive that kind of a threat environment, then that's pretty good. That's how we met, right? Last year, I became familiar with what you guys were doing. I was very impressed with the platform. Hey, can I pick your brain about some future stuff?
Sure.
I mean, you used to be a hacker when you were in high school, so you've been watching this for a long time. Just broadly, let me ask, do you think cybersecurity is kind of a mess, like where the hackers are just, it's way too easy and they can knock out the power in Queens and stuff, or is that a little hyperbole?
It's hard to say that it's hyperbole. I mean, you look at, for example, what the Russians did in Ukraine with this black energy exploit.
Yeah.
Not only were they able to cut power off, but they simultaneously launched a denial of service attack against the customer response center to increase the amount of time it took for the knowledge to even get disseminated.
Demonstrate some coordination there.
Yeah, exactly. And they had also internal knowledge that they had mapped out. Look at, for example, what the West has done with Stuxnet. It's when
the
people
West.
When people talk about the most impressive, if anyone ever asked me, like, what's the most impressive piece of code that you've ever seen written, with hands down, it was straight to Stuxnet.
That is pretty impressive. Yeah.
So it's hard to say it's hyperbole, but at the same time, it does feel a little sensational to think that we could take down the power grid in Queens.
Do you think it's a fair fight when a nation state's going after a business?
No, definitely not. I mean, they have a lot more resources at the end of the day. At some point, defensively, I can foresee key companies working closer with government to preclude these kind of attacks.
I mean, is government the answer, or is it something else?
Probably government isn't the answer, to be honest. I mean, look at, for example, what Google dealt with. When they turned to the government for help. The Aurora attacks, Right. They turned to the government for help. There was really not much help to be offered, and so they spun up an internal team to essentially take matters into their own hands.
I mean, I'm sort of sympathetic in the sense that what's the government going to do, right? They don't own the infrastructure there. They're not the experts. So it's a little weird because you go about 40, 50 years, we assumed government protected infrastructure, period. I think it's exactly the opposite now, where government supports, but it's up to industry and infrastructure providers and all of us to protect ourselves somehow.
Well, they have the bigger budget. It's hard to convince a board, I think, to spend tremendous amounts of money for a what if. When the bottom line is your daily driver, this kind of longevity insurance policy probably isn't top of mind. So I think in some regard, government will be still required to help prioritize. Maybe they need to make some kind of consortium or fund, to help companies, to fund companies in fighting this battle.
Yeah, it could be. What's the future for InQuest?
So product-wise, we've been focusing mostly on mature environments, offering the technology stack to, high-value targets. But as we've seen, as time goes on, the targets are widespread. It could be anybody. It could be an intern working at the Democratic National Convention, and compromise of somebody's account, even at that low of a level on the totem pole, can result in elections swinging in one direction or another. So we want to essentially open this technology to the masses, and our plan for doing that is essentially to ask for users' email spools, and we'll deal with everything for them. So pivoting to a SaaS model, connecting to customer emails, and providing all the same defensive posture that we do for the Department of Defense, giving it to your average small and medium-sized business.
Interesting. So, well, that sounds great, and it looks like you're having fun.
Oh, it is. It certainly is. I tell everyone I've got the coolest train set in the world. Very interesting data, very interesting customer metrics.
That's great to see. Thanks for coming by the studio.
Thank you very much.
As you guys get bigger, you come back and you tell us more about InQuest.
We'd love to.
Dude, thanks for coming by.
Appreciate it.
Good deal. And we will see you next time.